Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Johnson.
Here.
Kane. Here. Alvey.
Here. All right, tonight we have two presentations. First, a presentation regarding an update on stormwater rates, and that'll be followed by the federal legislative program. I'll turn it over to Administrator Bach to introduce staff.
Thank you, Mayor. As you noted, the first item on our agenda this evening is about stormwater. This is an item that has been out there for some time, one that we started working last year when we went through and started working on an introduction of a couple of different proposals that we took to the community. This is something that's really come to us because we look at it from, I'll say, two main factors. The first being that of need. When we look at what we have going on in the community today, as far as washouts in areas or just different drainage issues we have across the community, the amount of funding that we have going into this account is not enough to pay for major projects that we have. So we had to look at it from that perspective to come up with different solutions, and staff spent a considerable amount of time evaluating projects in the community and then determining different structures that we could propose to come forward. The second on it was that regard to equity. The current stormwater rate we have now is a flat $4.50 bill that everyone in the community receives monthly. And when I say everyone, it goes out to all the parcels of property, but it doesn't matter whether you're a small house here on Strawberry Hill or you're the Walmart out on 110th Street, you pay the same $4.50. So one of the other big aspects of what we were doing was trying to make this much more equitable in regards to the amount of stormwater that you cause are accountable for with the community. So with that, staff spent a lot of time on this, and I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Fisher, our Director of Public Works, and he will start the presentation and let his team take it from there. Jeff?
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Make quick introductions. We have Sarah White here to my right, who's a Public Works Project Manager, Dave Reno, Public Works Community Engagement Officer, and then Anna White, Economist, Project Manager for Black and Beach. She's been with us the entire time. Before we get started on the presentation, and please maybe hold questions until the end, we'll get through this presentation efficiently. I'd like to talk generally about the state and condition of our community's infrastructure. In the last year, we've described and quantified the conditions and costs of the street network, and stormwater directly ties to street conditions as well. We have also discussed recently the condition of our wastewater systems and how those conditions drive the negotiations with the Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Justice, and then tonight, the state of the stormwater system and how we're going to solve those problems. There's obviously a history in this community of flooding in several locations. Staff recognizes that all these discussions conclude with some very difficult decisions because those decisions affect people's lives. For decades, our society's kicked the can down the road, and it is absolutely true that now we are faced with the difficult challenge of updating that infrastructure. In fact, about 50 years ago, the nation spent about 4% of the gross domestic product, and today it's estimated about 1.4% gross domestic product. So a significant difference. The community has made investments, really important investments, excuse me. It's going to require a larger sustained commitment to catch up and meet expectations. Staff's working hard and diligently to present responsible solutions. I believe the people in this room recognize the fact that infrastructure investment has a direct positive impact on the health and welfare of this community. There's all kinds of research to support that. So as we move through this presentation tonight, I'm sure we'll be thinking about what we want this community to look like and feel like in the next 5 years and 10 years and even 50 years. So it starts with a commitment to infrastructure that provide essential services, and therefore we believe it is important to adopt a new rate and structure on June 27th and make that commitment. So we'll start with the presentation. The history of this stormwater fund: it is an enterprise fund. It was stood up by the UG in 2009. It is an enterprise fund just like water and wastewater and electric. It is paid for by user fees. There are no taxes involved. The current rate structure is the flat fee, and so everybody pays the same, whether it's a resident or a commercial business. So therefore it is unfair and inequitable. The level of the fee is also inadequate. It's only producing, generating about 3.8 million annually. That is not meeting the needs, not even close. The next step for our community, obviously, is to adopt a structure and fee that generates revenues that are adequate and palatable to as many as possible. As a result of the public engagement that Mr. Reno will highlight a little later, staff is proposing a hard surface rate structure, an impermeable surface rate structure. The recommendation is to begin charging customers for 45 cents per 500 square feet of hard surface per month, starting on June 1, 2020. It would increase to 71 cents per 500 square foot per month on January 1, 2021, and increase every year after. It is important to note that this proposal also charges UG, BPU, and nonprofit organizations. We'll discuss the details of the plan a little more in detail later. We believe we're going to present a responsible plan tonight. You may recall in previous discussions, our benchmark group included a few more cities than this, but we've narrowed it down to cities that are most like KCK in a number of different ways. But in both groups, in any case, this structure, this rate that's being proposed is the lowest in that group in year one. It's, with the exception of KCMO, it is also the lowest in year two. You might remember that KCMO, the important difference is that their rate only pays for operations and maintenance, does not pay for capital. And of course, we don't know what other cities will do to adjust their rates in the future, but we believe we'll still be in the lower end of that spectrum for the foreseeable future. So the remainder of this presentation is laid out on this roadmap. Talk about why we're here, what does the plan look like, what did the community engagement look like, how did the plan evolve as a result of the community engagement, how we compare against others, the outcomes, and then what's next. So why are we here? You might remember our community is made up of nearly 50 basins. That's because we are bordered by two major rivers. This proposal only targets 8 basins, the most problematic 8 basins. If we were to attack all of the issues in all of the basins, we would be in the neighborhood of $140 million. We are not proposing that. We are only focused on the 8 basins, and we started out at $58 million back in November. Now we are targeting, and that was in 5 years, on a 5-year plan. Now we are only targeting $30 million over 7 years, so we've reduced it and extended the period. I want to hand it over to Sarah. She'll talk a little bit about the plan.
So as Jeff said, we have a lot of water in our community, being surrounded by 2 rivers. Water is a valuable resource, but it also presents a multitude of challenges for our community. Our stormwater program is not only made up of the operations and maintenance of over 335 miles of storm sewer system, but it also includes environmental compliance, reducing pollutants into our waterways, and protecting our current waterways. Also, flood control projects. It's evident just in the past couple months, the magnitude and force that water has and what it can cause damage to whole communities. We also, our stormwater program handles the new stormwater system enhancements through our CIP projects. So why is stormwater program so important to our community? Stormwater is something that until it's raining, you don't really see the problems. So a lot of the stuff has been pushed aside, out of sight, out of mind. We have two major projects right now that are going on that were emergencies to fix due to the high rain events that have happened over the past couple years. One being the Turkey Creek wing wall, and the second one being along Turkey Creek as well, shown in this picture here at 8th and Seminary, which was a road collapse that happened a few months ago because of the rain events. Just in the past 3 years, so from 2016 to June of 2019, been a very extremely wet past couple years. We've had over 7,400 work orders just concerning our storm system and stormwater complaints, flooding complaints. So that's a lot of issues that have been going on. I'm going to run through just some of the things that you guys probably see when you're out and about, what your constituents call in about, what we go out and meet with people about, and these are just some of the common problems that currently we do not have funding to take care of all of these problems. Water in intersections, major road failures due to large rain events, washing out the road, making the road collapse. Sinkholes, here's another example of road issue. Our current system needs maintenance, and we've deferred maintenance due to what our funding ability is right now. So this would be, we're in a reactive approach to our maintenance, and we want to move to a proactive approach. And then we also have large emergencies that come up that impact our residents and our businesses from their daily lives. Where is that? I'm sorry. This is Clinton Avenue and Southwest Boulevard, just just north of Southwest Boulevard by the Quick Trip there at 31st, Roanoke, Southwest Boulevard area. So go in a little bit more detail about what our plan, what we're proposing. As we've mentioned, our objectives of looking at a different rate structure is a fair, equitable stormwater fee, as well as effectively getting the money that we need for our stormwater program and our future stormwater needs. So in 2017, Unified Government partnered with Black & Veatch to do a stormwater rate transition study. The first thing that we looked at is moving from a flat fee to a hard surface rate. So what is hard surface? Hard surface, or often we call it impervious surface, is anything that doesn't allow water to soak in. When rain or precipitation falls, it hits that hard surface and runs off. So that includes your roofs, your driveways, your patios, your parking lots. In our community in Kansas City, Kansas, 34% of, or a third of the impervious area is made up of residential properties, and 2/3 of it is non-residential properties. So with a hard surface rate, the more hard surface you have, the more you pay. And concurrently, we were also doing the stormwater master plan. We needed to know what our problems are, what our needs are, and put a dollar amount to that. And as Jeff said, that we came up with 80 problems in 50 watersheds, and we prioritized those down to the top needs, and these are high priority areas, 40 of those in 8 watersheds. And those are the ones that we all know of: Argentine, Armourdale, Jersey Creek, that have massive flooding issues. We also wanted to look at how to have a sustainable stormwater utility to not only handle some of the major flooding concerns, but also to handle our current system, maintaining and operating our current system. So this is a map illustrates some of the major repairs that are needed on our system. And as you can see, this covers our full service area. So with this rate transition, we would be able to fund these major repairs that are needed in the next 7 years. This one shows where our proposed stormwater projects are. These include the ones that we've listed from our master plan, as well as the Kansas City Levees project, which will raise the levees along the Kansas and Missouri River in Argentine, Armourdale, and the Central Industrial District.
I'm sorry, could you clarify the difference between major repairs and proposed stormwater projects?
Sure. So the major repairs are repairs needed on our current system. So these are not able to be done in-house because they're a large fix that's needed, and so it's highlighted here as a major repair. No, there's 122. These are separate than the projects that were listed in the master plan. These are currently collapsed pipes, pipes that need lined because they will fail in the future, those kind of things. So there's 122 major repairs needed in our system. These are the proposed stormwater projects coming from the master plan, and these are more of a watershed-based approach where you would not just fix a little section of pipe, you're going to look at the whole system.
Thank you.
So I'll pass this off to Dave to talk about our community engagement.
So we knew this proposal worked from an engineering perspective, and we knew it worked from a legal perspective. We also knew that it worked from a best practices perspective, but what we didn't know, and most importantly, is whether or not this proposal was going to work for our residents, for our businesses, for our nonprofits. We didn't have their input, we didn't have their feedback, and we needed it. So what did we do to get it? Beginning in about December 2018, we started holding open houses, business breakfasts. We held multiple meetings with the KCK Chamber up to as recently as last week. And we even formed a citizens advisory group. They have written a letter kind of outlining their feelings on this program. It's available in your packet tonight. But what about the folks who couldn't make it to our open houses or didn't interact with the chamber? For those people, we created an FAQ webpage where they could go and learn about what we were proposing, and we established a dedicated email address where they could reach out directly to a person, either myself or Sarah, and ask their questions or make sure that their feedback was included and it did have an impact on what we were doing. We also published some information regularly in our e-news. We shared updates with livable neighborhoods, and we reach out to our neighborhood business revitalization organizations. But what about folks who didn't have access to the internet? For those folks, we produced a 30-minute long video walkthrough of our proposal, and we included contact information at the end of that. And we ran that on UGTV for a number of months so that they also had an opportunity to let us know how they felt about this. We also left print materials with our local libraries and provided multiple interviews with local news media. In the end, our community did provide us with feedback, and they did make sure that we heard them, and we did, and we incorporated that into the plan. Now we're going to talk about how that plan changed based on the feedback that we had received.
So our original plan was a rate of $5.90 per 2420 square feet of hard surface. Through the various community engagement that we did, and we got feedback from those, the one thing that we heard is that most everyone, both residential and non-residential, understood why we would be moving to an impervious or a hard surface rate structure. However, the comments that we did get from the non-residential was that this was too much too fast. The other comment that we got was that we had discussed, or we talked about having a credit program. We were planning to do that in phase 2. They wanted to see what that would look like, and so we moved that up to phase 1. They also commented that they wanted to see these rates drop, so we made some adjustments. The big one being reducing our capital improvement projects from 58 million to 30 million. So quickly, I'll touch on the credit program. We had a committee that worked up a draft of what our credit program would look like. So what it is a way to reduce your monthly fee by implementing some form of a best management practice that would keep stormwater on your property, would help infiltrate it back into the ground. And the different credit types that we came up with would be a quantity, a quality, a direct discharge, and a landscaping credit. So how this would work is that you would make an environmental improvement by putting in some form of best management practice, and you would get a reduction in your bill. So the big part of this was the adjustments that we made to our rate. Our first proposed rate was $5.90 per 2420 square feet. That was this was a tiered approach for the residential. From the comments of too high, too fast, we moved that. We cut our program from 58 million to 30 million, which dropped that rate down to $3.85, as well as we changed it from a 5-year plan to a 7-year plan. So we stretched out those needs and able to reduce that rate. In April, we we had more community engagement throughout that time. And some of the comments were that people thought the tiered approach for residential was not equitable, it wasn't fair. So we went to a straight rate per hard surface area. So that changed the rate to 84 cents per 500 square feet. And if you're a little confused of how that compares to what we first proposed, $5.90 per 2420 square feet is equivalent to $1.22 per 500 square feet. So we went from $1.22 to 84 cents. And then with the 2018 audit information, staff worked with the CFO to fine-tune the financial plan. So we were able to drop that rate to 45 cents per 500 square feet. So how do we compare, and how does this impact your bill? What do the bills look like from this? So I'm going to just go through some examples of different classes of properties and what their bill would look like compared to our study group. So this is with the 45 cents per 500 square feet. Residential property, this would be, the one we have here is 2420 square feet. We did, as a policy, say that we would have a minimum rate of $4.50, and that's currently what people are paying. So we kept that minimum. So that puts UG second to the lowest in our study group. For a fast food drive-through restaurant, McDonald's or Taco Bell, for example, we're looking at, this one is just over 25,000 square feet. And then we showed what this location would be in these different communities in our study group. And so, as you can see, KCK is the lowest of this group. A medium-sized commercial retail store, such as Aldi's or Dollar General, this comes in at 97,000 square feet of hard surface area. Once again, KCK is the lowest of the study group. Our nonprofits that we looked at, schools, churches, other nonprofit organizations, this one, hard surface is approximately 95,000 square feet. It's also the lowest in the study group in KCK. This is a large industrial commercial distribution facility. Examples of that would be Amazon, FedEx, UPS. This one is at 970,000 square feet. But once again, you can see that with our rate, KCK would be the lowest in that group. So I pass this off to Anna to talk about what our plan gives us.
All right, so one of the objectives of the plan is to adequately fund the capital needs, the program needs, and this consists of both the capital needs as well as the operating needs. So a portion of the capital costs are based on the capital projects that are planned over the next 8 years. So there's a total of 11 projects that are anticipated to fall within that 8-year study period. 8 of these projects are from the master plan, and will address the projects that are in those 8 priority watersheds. The costs for these projects fall through in the period of 2021 to 2027 and make up the majority of that $30 million CIP number. The other 3 projects were identified outside of the master plan, and these include the Kansas City Levees project that you've heard about, the Turkey Creek wing wall, as well as a project in West Argentine. So the financing for these projects assumes that temp notes will be issued during the design and the construction period of the project, and then once the project is complete, a general obligation bond would be issued to redeem the temp notes. So you can see here for each project, we've kind of laid out how the costs fall in terms of design and construction, when temp notes would be issued, and then when a geo bond would be issued to redeem the temp notes. You can see how the projects lay out over that study period. So historically, projects have been 100% debt financed. However, beginning in 2021, the financing plan assumes that 10% of the costs will be cash financed and 90% will be debt financed. So this will help keep the total debt service requirements to 1/3 of the total annual revenue requirements for the stormwater utility. So when we look at the annual cash needs for the stormwater utility, we need to consider the following costs. The first is operation and maintenance expense, and this is reflected by the dark blue portion of each of those bars there for each year. In addition to the stormwater operating budget, projected O&M also includes 2 other items. One is phasing in additional funding for the Capital Maintenance Improvement Program, the CMIP, by $250,000 per year from 2021 to 2024. So this will help the utility move from operating in reactive mode to a proactive mode. Second is phasing in of stormwater costs that were identified that are currently being funded from the wastewater fee, phasing those in to be recovered from the stormwater fee. This is about $2 million that we're phasing in over 3 years from 2021 to 2023. So if you look at the projection of the operating costs, you can see that it grows from 2019 up to about 2024 as we're phasing in these additional costs, and then at that point it starts to level out. The next 2 items are debt service. The first is existing debt service on existing GEO bonds that were issued to fund past capital projects. This is shown in orange on the bars. And then we have proposed debt service for the major capital projects that are planned throughout the study period, and this is shown in gray. Shown in yellow on the chart is the capital outlay. This is for cash financing of major maintenance projects. And then last, we have the proposed 10% cash financing of future major capital projects that I mentioned, and this is shown in light blue on the chart. So the stormwater fee is then determined by taking these annual cash requirements for the utility, dividing it by our total number of units, and that's how we get to the unit charge that's shown there at the bottom of the graph.
It's important to note that the first 2 projects in this year and next were the wing wall and the levees. That's about $20 million. And if there's not a rate adjustment, a transition that comes out of this, that $20 million will hit the general fund and be challenging, I'm guessing. So just wanted to note that. So now, next it's about decisions, really. It's those difficult decisions. It's those imperfect decisions. It's decisions that are going to affect somebody or some portion of the population in a negative way. So, real quick, the proposal again, there's no change in 19. It wouldn't start till June of 2020. And then again, January of 2021 and every year after. And it's definitely worth noting that 92% of the residences in 2020 are not affected. 42% of non-residences are not affected. In 2021, a significant portion not impacted. And again, in 2022, a good portion not impacted. In fact, there's a small portion that are not impacted for the 7 years. So last slide, the next slide is the last slide. It is the recommendation, but I'm going to go through these two alternatives for you before we get there. The upper half of this slide is what would happen if we kept the current structure, the flat fee. Year one, it'd be $770, and then there's increases for the 7 years. And you can see from the pie chart, there's a great imbalance between residential and non-residential. It does meet the needs of the 7-year plan if we went that direction. It is easy to administer and understand. However, it does create a burden on those residences. 97% will carry the burden. And there's obviously inequity built into that. The second lower half of the slide is the commission could choose to go with this. This is the KCK Chamber proposing a sort of a hybrid structure. I worked with them last week to develop this. It is a hybrid because it does charge residents one rate and non-residents another rate. These rates can't really be compared. This KCK Chamber is trying to hit $11 million a year target. That means it would start year one hitting $11 million and through the 7 years, every year hitting $11 million. They have done some work since we last met, and that was really around breaking up that non-residential into 5 tiers. And so much like our original proposal with residential, there would be 5 tiers, and the lowest tier would be sort of the small businesses, would pay less than the larger businesses. And so we could go that direction. That is possible. The pros and cons of that would be that it would meet the revenue needs. It would produce dollars earlier, faster. It would be easy to administer and understand. However, 59% of the burden would be on residents. There is some inequity, and the residential component of that rate, sort of the base rate of that model, is somewhat arbitrary. So I know we'll spend a little more time on that. So I'm going to jump to the recommendation, which is the hard surface method. Again, it would start in June of 2020 and increase again January 1, 2021, and then every year after. The pie chart, you can see that it is more balanced than the other two. It will meet funding needs for that 7-year plan. It is based on individual amounts of hard surface. It is legally defensible and best practice. The cons would be that there are more administrative requirements to this versus the other two. The bill impacts would be larger for the larger properties with a lot of impervious surface. And you can see, again, in the table, a large portion of the population not impacted for the first 2 or 3 years, and a small portion that won't be impacted at all for 7 years. Staff's always stated that the rate structure was the most important objective. The hard surface method is widely considered best practice, not necessarily industry practice. There are a fair amount of cities that do use a flat fee or a hybrid. The hard surface method, especially when all properties are individually calculated, is the most fair, equitable, and defensible method. The second most important objective in this initiative is to, whatever we choose, that it generates enough revenues. Staff recommends this option. Staff recommends adopting 7 years of rates so that this plan has the right support, and that we recommend again that a method and a rate be adopted on June 27th. we'll entertain any questions.
And so, thank you, staff. Excellent, very thorough. And you're seeking direction through this workshop as to how to move forward. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We spent a lot of time on this, as Mr. Fisher indicated. We started back in '97 trying to work through this process, developed it, came out with the program, and then we've had it in the community for the last 6 months. We are at a point now where we do have projects we need to move forward on. As he noted, we have a couple of major stormwater projects moving forward now that we can either determine to fund through this program or we can pay for through the general fund if we decide not to go in any direction like this. But then we'll have more projects down the road. But this is our recommendation, and we would seek feedback, but would really like to put ourselves in a position to move forward with an adoption in the near future.
Thank you. So if I could, first of all, based upon what I've heard in the past when it was first presented several years ago, my opinion is that the impermeable surface rate is the fair, I think, wise way to move on this. In some way, we have to incorporate into the whatever policy we enact, whatever structure we enact. I think we do have to, I would suggest we need to stick with the impermeable surface rate. To what degree, that's up for discussion, I guess. But again, those who yield more stormwater runoff have to take more responsibility. They're more obligated, I think, to fund how we handle that stormwater. I want to go back to the communications piece. I understand that there were targeted mailers sent, and the word targeted, I think, is key there. I've had several people, especially manufacturers, commercial establishment owners, complain that they were not aware of this moving forward because they did not receive a mailer. They may have heard about it from other people. In fact, one district in the Central Industrial District said that they were not aware of it at all until late in the process. So I understand that the purpose of this was to elicit feedback to put into our discussion and our planning, and so we achieved that. But I would suggest that another piece of communication here needs to be to let the entire community know that this is in process. So I think that doesn't look good, doesn't sound good to people when they are going to be affected in very significant ways about something moving forward. We did obviously get the feedback we needed, and I would say probably fairly representative, especially I think because of the engagement of the chamber, but still there were those who might have wanted to be a part of this and had not been informed about it, and so were not able to participate. It's one of those things where how do you know to get engaged if you don't know that there's something to be engaged with? So that's just a general comment. When we look at, I have a concern as well, projects reduced from 58 million to 30 million. And again, we're trying to do this in a way that we can fund it and not overburden. But when you showed the comparisons of what other communities pay and businesses in other communities pay and residents pay in other places, we're at the lowest end, other than the KCMO, which also funds it in other ways and doesn't fund capital projects. I'm not an advocate for greater taxes, but at the same time, or fees, but I am an advocate for taking care of our infrastructure and doing the projects we need to take care of. So at the same time that we have to be sensitive to the burden this will place on institutions and residents, but it seems to me we need to continue to make the case or really dig into, and we need to be aware of, made aware of what are absolutely vital projects that if we don't take care of them, will only get worse. So I'll go back to, for instance, the wing wall at Turkey Creek. If we don't take care of that, it only gets worse. The pumps in Argentine, West Argentine, if we don't take care of them now, the cost will triple for us. It's as simple as this. If my changed oil light comes on or my oil light on my car shows that it's low and I don't take care of it, I'm getting a new engine at some point. So we really have to be responsible stewards of the infrastructure and take care of it, which actually might cause us to actually generate even more revenues to take care of more projects. But again, it's a balancing act. You know, it's interesting to me that other communities, as you said, choose not to use the impermeable surface. Not sure what their rationale would be. I just want to again say that I think that's fair, equitable, and even if it's not widely accepted, it does seem to me to be industry best practice.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, too. Great presentation, but I just have a few questions for clarity's sake, and I think I would like just one more time to have a one-on-one, or one-on-two or three or four, however. But for right here and right now, if I'm understanding this, 500 square feet of hard surface. If a resident, I'll say a resident has that much impervious surface, for the 7 years, will their stormwater rate increase or not? Because I'm looking at this, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. And it looks to be applying the rate, but it doesn't look like the numbers are going up, which is fine for people that have
Right.
500 feet or less.
500 square feet, they would see no increase over 7 years.
Okay, and I know that there was a group that you referred to, so this is going to help. Now, let's say you move it up to 1,000 square feet,
Still no impact.
still no impact. All right, here's the other question then.
Not till you get to 2,000 in year 2024.
Okay. Who is the determinant? Who or what entity is the determinant of how much square footage of this impermeable surface does a homeowner or resident have?
So the impervious area is calculated using a flyover data where they capture the hard surface. We did one of those in 2018, which we will use if we move forward with this. That data will be what is used to calculate the bills. So it calculates the hard surfaces such as roofs, driveways, patios, parking lots, through a radar imaging, and calculates that as hard surface. We will have an appeal process so that if someone is saying that number looks high, I don't think I have that, they'll be able to come in and we'll verify if there's an issue with that number.
Okay, and where will this information be retained? Would this be retained at the assessor's office, or where would it be retained?
This information we've had, we use it for lots of different things, but it is currently in our GIS system. Our GSS houses that, and we do that it gets updated about every 4 to 6 years. We need to have that information updated, and so the latest one was 2018, but they house all of that information in our GSS group.
I would say most in the metro do it that way.
Okay, but where is that? For instance, if I want to know, and I will, how much impervious square footage I have on my property, who do I call to find that out?
Right now, people have been asking through our stormwater email, and we get them that information.
So
However,
they have to
that-
go online?
No, they
They
can
could
call
call-
us. They can call
call
staff.
or-
We'll be
yeah.
the ones they call.
Okay, so Public Works Department, who do I, okay.
But it would be something on, it could be something on our UG maps that would show, when you click on your address, it would be something they could click on and find what their impervious area is.
Yeah, if we can figure out how to show that online, we would.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking that's great. And I'm thinking about people who have nothing to click on also.
Yeah, they can call staff for sure.
Okay. All right. And the number that you would give them now would be the number in terms of square footage of impervious surface. That would not change unless they, for some reason, wanted to challenge it.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So it's updated.
All right. All right, let's say they have that, they're okay with the square footage shown. Is this online also, that so someone could see what their projected payout, increase or not, would be if we adopt this for the next 7 years?
I think we would definitely work on that kind of detail in the implementation phase, but certainly if we can figure out how to make that kind of information available to the public, we would.
Assuming this stopped. All right, thank you.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you very much. First of all, these large charts didn't come with the electronic packet, so I would just ask that when we create electronic packets, we put all documents, and then there's also a letter that came from this advisory group, which also was not included in the electronic packet. So let's just try to get all materials in there if we could, please. I would really appreciate it, since I'm trying to save at least a tree a month. Second thing, Mr. Fisher, I've said this to you before, and almost feel like I need to apologize, because you arrived and we went, welcome, everything's broken, fix it, but don't raise our rates. So, I mean, I get the enormity of the task that you and your staff are up against. I do agree with you, and I do agree with the mayor. I do believe the impervious surface square area calculation is the most equitable and defensible. But I still have some concerns about, as you and I have talked about before, about the rate increases and how fast we get there. I do believe our communication really on this was better than we've done in the past, but I also think we fell far short of what we should aspire to in terms of getting the word out and engaging more than just the usual suspects, or we need to really up our game. One thing I would suggest is we consider using the Citizen, our paper newsletter, because for all of our electronic communication methods, I'm going to guess that only a small fraction of our residents actually see any of our electronic communications, be it UG News or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But that Citizen newsletter goes to every household that has a valid BPU hookup, and I think we're going to get better coverage if we go with that. Now, it's not as immediate, and it is costly, but I do believe, again, I'm channeling my mom here, give me something I can hold in my hand and read. So, now, I do agree that our increased rate, so you've given us several examples of how our increased rate will be comparable to or even lower than the rates that are currently being charged for similar sized impervious square area in other communities in the metro area. My concern always has been that while I agree, once we are there, we are lower than almost everybody else. But compared to where we are today, getting there is still a big jump. And I still worry that it is a jump that can't be absorbed, especially by a lot of our larger square surface area customers who have built budgets not anticipating this magnitude of increase, but will now have to absorb it. So that's always been my concern, and it remains my concern. But then I also, because I was looking here at your $872.87. If you can go back, it's the industrial commercial distribution facility. That one. It's the last of your calculations. Nope. It's the last of your calculations. It's at the top of the left-hand bar as a red, there you go, that's it. All right, so this, $872.87 really looks comparable to what is being paid for the same impervious square area in other communities, correct? So that's what we have is, it's the same equivalent square area in all these other communities would generate
Yes.
these different dollar values.
Right.
And we look really great, except when you stop to consider that it's wrong, it's broken, but that parcel is paying $4.50 right now. So that's still a 19,000% increase in 1 year. And so while it looks good, once we get to where we really want to go, the magnitude of the climb to get there is still very steep, and I worry that it's unsustainable, it's untenable to our small businesses. And then I compound that with this. If I look on this chart, which I'm glad Commissioner Bynum showed me, it showed me that our multiplier, 0.45 in 2020, becomes 1.28 in 2027. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have a really steep climb to start, and then we have a continuing climb after that. And I get it. It's necessary to fix everything that's broken. But what that does is it takes that 872 and it roughly triples it. So at 2027, this parcel's paying $2,400, which now puts it squarely toward the top of all of our comparison cities. So I caution you not to show me just the best case scenario, but show me the worst case scenario too. Okay, a really steep climb, it's almost vertical to get started, and then we flatten it out, but it still keeps going up. And again, I'm gonna need some time to digest what this is gonna do to the budgets of all of the large and small businesses, because nobody's had a chance to plan proactively for this, to build their 2020, their 2021 budget to account for a 19,000% increase. It's been my concern from day one. It remains my concern even today. Maybe some of my other commissioners will convince me that it shouldn't be a concern, but I still need to digest this. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Markley?
Thanks, Mayor. So District 6, I think, is the only district that has repeatedly had stormwater show up in the top 5 most critical items that our residents identify in their survey every year. So we usually always see infrastructure and public safety are in the top couple for every commission district. Stormwater is always in the top 5 for my district. So it's an issue that I see repeatedly. Obviously, part of that is due to the Argentine area, but in Turner as well, we have a number of issues, one of which was pictured in the photographs. Just to be clear, for people who might be watching and seeing all these numbers, right now, I pay $4.50, and so does Walmart, and so does Dollar General, and so does the largest parcel of concrete in our area, pays $4.50. And if you're looking at this picture, you're thinking, oh, so the same guy in Lenexa is paying $3,200, and here they're giving us $4.50. I would just submit that this parcel is more likely to be able to come up with $800 than our resident, and we can't put that on their back and say, resident, you should be paying me $800 a month. We have to solve this problem. Stormwater impacts people's quality of life in a way that none of the other issues that we address daily do. Even a pothole is not as bad as having your front yard and basement flooded every time it rains. We can't expect to attract people to our neighborhoods and have them stay here long term if they can't keep their house dry. We can't expect them to live here and have their basement flood every time it rains. We have to do something to solve the infrastructure needs of our neighborhoods if we want to grow our community and put higher quality houses in our community, because you're also not going to come in and get a parcel of land and build a beautiful $500,000 house on it when you know that it floods every time it rains. So if we're going to increase the quality of our neighborhoods and if we're going to get people to stay here long term, we have to solve those infrastructure problems. I don't think doubling the rates of our residents is the way to do that. I think I understand Commissioner McKinnon's concern. There are some businesses that will be hard hit. There's no doubt. And there are nonprofits that will be hard hit. There's no doubt. but I'm pretty sure Walmart can find $800. I'm pretty sure because they're already finding it in Lenexa and Shawnee and Lawrence and Topeka. They're finding that money somehow in their budget and all those other communities where they are also located. So I think they can find it for us as well. And I think we need them to find it if we're gonna grow the type of community that they want to stay in as well.
Commissioner Walters, did you have?
Yes, I had a question. I'm interested in the credit program. I don't know if that program is fleshed out yet, but I do just philosophically like the idea of trying to address the problem at its source and everything we can do to incentivize property owners to take responsibility for their own runoff or detention and put, minimal stress on the overall system. I think we should incentivize them to do that. Is our credit program such that new developments or even existing developments would see a benefit in adapting their projects to increase their sustainability, if you will, or and is it robust enough to really help them do that, or is it not?
Yeah, well, I do feel it's in draft form and would finalize that after in the implementation, but with the help of the chamber. We've developed a draft, and it's got a few different parts. So part of it's how much they do to address quality of the water, and how much they do to address quantity. And so I think they are eligible for up to 55% credit. Is that correct? And then there is if you are adjacent to the two major rivers, and you're not, your runoff is not going through the UG system, then you'd be eligible for 75%. So I think this is a robust program the way it sits right now. We just have to finalize the details of it.
Well, I think that sounds great, because I think the last discussion we had, my recollection was the maximum would be a 20% reduction. So the percentages that you're talking about are much more realistic in my mind than that. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner, I would add that part of your question was those that had already invested. Yes. So if you've come in and we put you through, you did improvements to your property when you came in initially, that is eligible to be part of the credit program. It does not have to be something that is done. If you did it and thought forward, or it was part of the requirements that we put in place, then you'll get that credit.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
Commissioner Kane?
Well, I guess I'm going to be the bad guy. When you involve the chamber, that's great. But may I remind the commission that some of the guys that sit on the chamber, also the people that went to the state chamber to eliminate prevailing wage for Wyandotte County. So I could care less what the chamber says. All the school districts are going to be hurting from this. The churches are going to be hurting from this. And the community, I don't even know if everybody knows what's going on. But I am not equipped, not going to vote for something that work goes so far uphill that we may slide backwards. There are senior citizens that are living day to day. And if you go right down here at lunchtime every day, that crowd gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not going to get smaller if we keep taxing them with this little tax credit. Well, it only costs this much this year, then it's double the next year, then it's triple the next year. And we're saying we're going to hold the line on taxes. You're running for election. Did you hold the line on taxes? And I agree, Angela needs some help in her area, no doubt about it. Another thing, you got this here. Show the one where you got just the small group. Let's say yes. I want to see the slide that shows a small group. And we do this too often. We put slides up here we can't read. Not just you guys, it's everybody. You went past it. Where's the farthest west end of that? Those dots. 84th and what?
Parallel and I-70.
Okay, so we have one project in District 5, but we're asking District 5, once again, who pay the most tax on houses, to pay for a tax they're not going to get any use out of it. And I agree that area needs help. But we're already taxing District 5 a boatload of taxes, I say, every single year. We get the least amount of representation, we get the least amount of activity in the area. And some of those people can afford for it to go up. But Piper just passed that school bond issue, and they're stretched to the max. Went down Leavenworth Road this morning where they were building a new school, KCK, and the community college. I mean, you're talking about a significant amount of money that I'm not sure we can raise, and we're even equipped to do it, and I'm not sure the community knows what's going on. I know we've reached out to a lot of people, and I know we had some outreach meeting, but how many meetings do we have across the community in each district?
We had one in your district out at the Kane Community Center. Otherwise, we held them in all the other districts as well, but one.
Okay. My district goes all the way into 72nd and Parallel, and one meeting in my district isn't enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to blindfold these people, send it on their BPU bill, and say, sorry, it sucks to be you. I don't even know if we need this as bad as they're saying that we do, other than maybe in Angela's area and a couple of other ones. So let's target them, fix those areas. But now we're trying to, and at the end of 7 years, does it stop? Or does it keep going up?
Well, we're only targeting 30 million. We started off at 58, and the 58's still there, and there's 140 million in all the basins. So I don't see that.
I think this is a bad idea all the way around.
Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you. I know we need to control our stormwater. I think where I am is, I feel like the presentation we've been given tonight is unlike any other presentation I've seen to date. And it's dramatically different. It's better, but I agree with Commissioner Kane that we definitely need a whole lot more information given to the community in any variety of ways, including the citizen, but I don't know that we've engaged the community yet enough, and especially since everything about this strikes me as different than everything I've seen to date. So I think we need more community engagement on the issue. I also am curious, if we step back a minimum of 30 to 60 days beyond the hope for June 27 date, what does that do to potential implementation? So I'd be curious, if we took a little bit longer, what's that do to your timeline?
I might take that, Jeff. I think, and I don't know if it's clear, what we were proposing up there for 2020 was to start in June of 2020, not January. So we're able to, if we're pushed back, we're able to implement at that stage. Really, it's a matter of just planning for it, and probably to the point that's been brought up a couple of times, it's making sure if we approve something, how much advance notice we're giving to businesses or residents as to what the change would be. In this case, it's mostly, there's no impact really on 90% of the residents, so really it's looking at the businesses so they recognize what their costs would be next year when they're planning their budgets.
Correct. I do think, though, that Commissioner Kane is spot on with the concern for our nonprofits and our churches. They will be hit hard.
Yeah.
Commissioner McGee?
Thank you, Mayor. So just a couple of clarity questions, Jeff. There are two proposals on the table this evening for consideration. One is staff recommendation, and the second one is, I think, what you've referred to as the chamber proposal.
3, considering our current rate structure and increasing those. Yes.
Okay. If we went with the staff recommendation, then 98% of our residents would see no difference in their stormwater bill. Is that correct?
92% would not be impacted in year one.
So 92% of our residents would not see a change in their stormwater bill if we went with the staff recommendation, correct?
Correct.
And yet, if we went with the chamber recommendation, all of our residents would see their bill double. And this is just the first year, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then that's just for next year, right?
Right.
And then let's go back to the first proposal, the staff's recommendation. In the staff's recommendation, are the 92% of residents that would not be affected, are they ever affected?
And year two, I think it's nearly 70% would see no impact. Year three, it was 30-something% would see no impact.
So beyond next year, our residents, more and more residents will see an impact.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Philbrook?
First, I want to thank you for all the hard work, and I know it hasn't been easy, although I don't particularly agree with how it's gone, you know, how it was initiated and a few other things like that, because I think it caused some ill will. But having said that, now that we're past that and there's actually some work being done between the chamber, you know, representing business, and the UG, I'm looking at that as a great improvement in communication, but I am so far not ready to move this forward because of how complicated it is, and that I have to be able to digest this, and I have to be able to explain this to people, not just the residents, but the businesses, and be able to look at myself in the mirror 2 or 3 years down the line and say, oh man, what did you do? I want to know what I'm doing so I understand it. So this is a first step for me as far as moving down the road to approve something. So that's where I am on this.
Commissioner McKiernan, do you have another?
I just wanted to say that I completely agree with Commissioner Markley. We have a bona fide big problem with stormwater runoff creating hazardous as well as unpleasant conditions. I mean, I know even in my own district, I have a lot of places that routinely flood every time it rains just a moderate amount. Our own Armourdale Recreation Center takes on water when it rains just a moderate amount. So certainly, but I think that one of the things that we still need to really do is engage all of our citizenry and help them to embrace the magnitude of the challenge that we're all facing. For them to know that we've got this huge problem that needs to be addressed, and that right now that huge runoff problem directly affects them, and that to fix this huge problem, it's going to take a huge investment. And at that point, we start to titrate out the fastest possible resolution with the least possible negative financial impact. And I get it. There are absolutely some companies who could absorb that increase with no change to their bottom line whatsoever. It would be not even a rounding error on their bottom line. But there are others where it would make a difference in terms of how well they can operate. So this is one where I definitely see both sides. I see the magnitude of the very urgent problem to change the stormwater runoff so it's less of an impact, negative impact on our citizens. But I want to try to blunt the negative economic impact as much as I can. I don't know where the happy medium is. Thank you.
Commissioner Burrows?
Thank you. I have a few questions, if I may. I'm going back to page 11 for the committee's review, the commissioner's review. The adjustment, you went from 5 years to 7 and from 58 million to 30. What was the justification for lowering those projects by the years and limiting the number of projects? What was the reasoning behind that?
That was based on feedback from the public engagement that it was too much, too fast. And so we packaged together $30 million worth of improvements based on their highest priority and being able to fit them together in 30 million.
We still plan on attacking those projects after the 7th year?
The $30 million, the portfolio that we presented will be done in the 7 to 8 years.
But we still have projects that need to be addressed, I guess is my question.
Yes.
So we did that because of input from the community, not because we need to address these projects? I mean, this is what I'm trying to get to. If these projects, and we're mandated to do this, and we're in such need to do this, why would we hold back and limit what we are responsible for implementing just to get a public buy-in on these projects, and then after year 7, we've got them? I mean, that's my concern. If we're going to be transparent about the projects, let's put it all on the table, because I truly believe when it comes to the health and welfare of the people in this community, they're going to be supportive of those initiatives. And it's about building the trust in what we need to do. And that would just be my comment. And I appreciate the 5 to 7 year question and the answer you gave in reference to having that input. But I also believe that we have other issues besides just the infrastructure. We have drainage ditches and waterways in our community that have filled with silt or filled with debris and have grown over and clogged the tubes in our roadways. And some of these issues that we face today is because of lack of maintenance on our part to address those concerns. So we've been derelict in our responsibilities to some extent, that these waterways and drainage ditches have filled up, causing road and infrastructure problems that we have to continue to address. Is that going to be addressed in this infrastructure?
Yes, part of the proposal is increase in operations and maintenance dollars so we can address those more daily routine things in a more proactive manner. That has been part of the big problem with this fund. It is not generating enough revenues to attack the operations and maintenance in a proactive manner.
So if we were to include a ceiling amount of money, hypothetically $500,000 in the first every year for the first 5 to 7 years to start cleaning out those waterways and cleaning out those drainage ditches, that might be a show of goodwill to the citizens of this community that these things can now be addressed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. I've been over here doodling, trying to figure out how much it would cost my church. It was brought up that churches would be affected, and it looks like I'm looking at an additional $7 to $25 or $26 over that 7-year period of time, which does sound like a small dollar amount, but that's on top of everything else that's there. I think I would err on the side of caution in terms of how we roll this out to the community. I'm always a proponent of measuring more than once, 2-3 times if necessary, to make sure, and then cutting to make sure our community is brought up to speed. Questions are asked. I think it's very astute to be able to acknowledge the fact that a lot of people are not really aware of how this is going to impact them over the coming years. And so we've already got issues about transparency when we look at our utility bills and how what ties to what on the bill. So I think a measure of just patience would be our best move overall. Thank you.
All right, we have another presentation to move. Is there any other questions or comments? I would, again, just suggest that perhaps the oil light came on a long time ago and we ignored it. And so now here we are trying to replace an engine. And frankly, it's not just about stormwater. It's about curbs. It's about sidewalks. It's about our all the infrastructure that we depend upon. And I'm going to echo Commissioner Markley that at some point we have to invest in our community, and we have to make the case that investment in our community is worth it if we're going to grow and continue to attract, to improve the quality of life, to attract residents and maintain residents. Here too often people say, there was a letter in the Star this morning complaining about the state of 38th Street, complaining that all the money goes out to the Piper area, which we know is not true, right? So this is where we are. We have to take this issue on. It's not just about stormwater, it's really about all our infrastructure. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is regarding our 2019 federal legislative issues. At the end of last year, we did adopt some legislative issues, but as we've moved forward this year and have gone under contract with a lobbyist at the federal level, we got into more detail on this about how we could impact change at the federal level and have built a new legislative program. Our intent is to present this tonight. I believe you all should have received it Monday with your packet. But we're going to go through it in a little more detail this evening. And then we would like to adopt it at the end of this month. So if there are changes, we could make those, but we'd like to adopt it on the 27th. And then we have a formal program to be working with for a direction we have. To present this tonight, we have the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Maureen Mahoney, and Mike Taylor, who does our public relations and legislative affairs. Mike?
Before we start, I just want to say Thorn Run, as you know, is who we have employed for this piece of our strategy moving forward. And there was the announcement today that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has selected Kansas City as the site for, a research facility. Very important thing. There are different sites in Kansas City region that they are looking at, but they have selected Kansas City among all the cities in the country. But as soon as that was announced, Jim Davenport of Thorn Run sent us information to let us know that please be aware that there is significant opposition to this move to Kansas City in Washington. So letting us know that immediately was very helpful. And I've already asked him, let us know what we need to do in terms of lobbying, working with our delegation and others to make sure it does come to Kansas City, whether it lands in Kansas City, Kansas or not. But so
I was going to make that announcement as well, so I appreciate you mentioning that. And that, by the way, was very much a bipartisan effort with the Missouri and the Kansas delegations. I'll also mention in terms of federal successes that we've had recently, the Turner Diagonal funding from the Build Grant is one, $13.8 million. The naming of the Quindaro site as a commemorative site. And then there was also over $400 million toward the levees in the area. So we have had some successes on the federal landscape. Quickly, I want to lay out a couple of issues that we will face on the federal level. So as you all know, there's a presidential election coming up. And we also have a major congressional election. So the only thing that I will point out about that is with those kind of elections going on, it tends to affect the way legislative policy gets done, whether that's at the state level or the federal level. So I would say don't look for any earth-shaking major legislation to come in the next year and a half. Funding will still come through, but don't look for any earth-shaking kind of legislation. And on the congressional elections, one of the biggest ones we've seen for a while is Senator Pat Roberts has announced his retirement, and so that'll be a very spirited race to replace him. And I think it gives us an opportunity to look at the candidates that are running, and as a local government, have the opportunity to question them and say, where do you stand on local government issues and community issues? Funding decisions, that's a large part of what our legislative program deals with and what we look to the federal government for. And the regulatory environment is another situation that is changing constantly. With the current administration, they are looking to diminish regulations in many cases. That could change if there's a different administration, but those tend to have a major impact on local government as well.
Well, and the mayor's mentioned Jim Davenport. He has great relationships with the federal agencies, so as we move forward, that's where so much of our funding is coming from. So it's a great advantage for us to have him in the mix.
And I do think that's one thing that Thorn Run Partners and Jim Davenport will help us with, is making improving those connections with the regulatory agencies that we have to deal with so often. So I wanted to say that this program, this is kind of the preamble. It's based on the principle that federal, state, and local governments are all partners in the effort to make Kansas and its communities great places for people to live, work, and play. That's the same preamble that is in our state legislative program, and I point that out because we really do depend on those partnerships. So a quick rundown. We look at transportation issues, and this is in order of the printed program that you have. The transit and trails are issues, rail and right-of-way, combined sewer overflows, of course, a big issue, the levee projects, waters of the United States, which has to deal with pollution and water quality, flood insurance, which particularly this summer has become a big issue, and it's up for renewal. The Health Department has asked me to put in support for a piece of legislation called the MAMA Act, and it's an acronym, but it deals with infant mortality and reduction of infant death. Opioid addiction is, of course, a major issue for cities all over the country, and we are actively engaged in that. Public safety, tax and finance, and then a host of city and county services that too detailed to go into. In terms of highways, probably the biggest issue right now, still pending out there, is the I-70/435 interchange near Village West. That's been on our list for a while, along with Turner Diagonal. We got the funding for Turner Diagonal, so now we're going to continue pushing for improvements, and that actually involves a couple of interchanges out there. It's I-70/435, but it's also State Avenue. And again, if you are out that way from a Sporting KC game, you know the kind of traffic issues that are caused out there that we really need to improve. So we'll be working to push for those kind of monies. And again, there's been constant talk about an infrastructure program in DC. We'll see exactly where that goes. Trails, we're making a point in anything we ask for in terms of infrastructure funding to also please consider that multimodal and allow funding for things that include bicycle, pedestrian, or recreational trails as a piece of any kind of a highway project or infrastructure project that we might do. Transit, Justice has asked us to put in for transit a couple of things, and one is an issue that we're seeing revisions to how federal funding formulas are done to ensure that underserved areas receive equitable funding. Part of the problem is the way some of that federal funding works is a Johnson County, based on population, which has more population than us but far fewer transit riders, gets more federal funding for transit than we do. And so we would like to see a change in that formula to actually send those dollars where the most riders are. So that's what that issue is about. And also giving a little more flexibility in the way that transit funding works in terms of the match commitment and being able to have a little more discretion to use it for operation. Most of the federal dollars we've gotten in the past for transit deal with capital, meaning we can buy a new bus. Operating is a big issue, and we'd like to see more flexibility there. Rail yard development, obviously the rail yards are a major part of our community, and so there are funds out there that we want to keep an eye on to see if we can't get some of those. And another issue that I know Commissioner Walters has worked on for a couple of years and talked about is the quiet zones and changing rail crossings. So we've put that in there again and continue to talk to our delegation about that. 6 years, okay. This issue is one that is very similar to language that's in our state program, and it talks about public property and right-of-ways, the ability for us to manage our public right-of-ways. And we have seen at the federal level as well as the state level on a number of occasions where private companies have wanted to limit the ability for us to manage what goes on in our right-of-ways. And the big fight right now with that is as the launch of 5G technology comes, and those wireless providers wanting to get into our right-of-ways. We fought this battle in the state legislature. The FCC has come down with some rules. We want to make it clear that we believe that we should be able to control the public lands that are ours, those right-of-way areas.
Well, whoever wins that contest wins it all, because when 5G rolls in, we are like many urban areas where we don't know the number, but maybe a third of our citizens don't have internet at home. But once 5G comes in, everybody has it because it's accessible on everyone's phone. So it will change everything. So we just need to make sure that we will be maintaining these as our municipality. So we need to make sure that we get those fees to allow us to continue that.
Well, you're basically referring to using the poles to put antennas, all that kind of stuff on that, yeah.
Yes.
So we get to charge for that versus.
Yes, that we feel like that we should be able to collect fees for using our publicly owned land that we are stewards of to put in those private assets that you're making a profit on. There's also an issue with the aesthetics in that, and we fought that at the state level too with the bill, is we want to make sure that those 5G small nodes, they're called, that they're able to install every 1,500 feet, have some kind of an aesthetic value, and that we have some control over what those poles or those devices look like. That they can't just put up anything and make it all ugly. So that's really the bottom line on that issue.
Thank you.
Combined sewer overflows, you've all heard about this issue for a number of years. We're still in the process of working through that. The page in your actual printed program is much lengthier than this, and it deals with some issues that we've discussed with Department of Justice and the EPA. The biggest issue here is, yes, we want to make sure that the water is clean, but we also have to do it in a way that's affordable. And you just came through a discussion on the stormwater. This deals with wastewater, but again, it's what kind of a burden would that put on us as a government and on our citizens, and what can they afford, and how quickly can we get it done? So it's a major issue that we're working with our delegation on. The levies, of course, are an ongoing issue, and again, that deals with water in the community. We did get major funding through the Corps recently to help all the levies in the area. We want to make sure that we get the flexibility and the ability to use those monies in the way we need to, and to protect the community, because those levies failing or not being there would be devastating to a number of areas of our community. There's the infant mortality issue. Opioid addiction is another one that we're watching. In fact, we are engaged in a national lawsuit against opioid manufacturers, and this one is a fight that'll take a while, but we wanted everyone to know that that it is something that's affecting our community, and we want our delegation to be aware. Public safety and crime prevention, a good chunk of funding for our police department and fire department and other public safety comes from federal dollars, so we want to be cognizant of that and make sure that legislation that has helped bring in that funding continues. The opportunity zones, which came about through the federal tax changes in 2017, we're still sort of waiting to see, but we had approved through the state. It's been a very cumbersome process, but the state approved 6 opportunity zones for KCK, Wyandotte County, and we're kind of waiting to see what the U.S. Treasury sets down as rules. What this basically is, being blunt, is it's a tax shelter for rich people, but it can benefit local communities. So if there are investors who are cashing in on a project, they've been successful, they're going to have to pay a lot of capital gains. If they take that money and invest it into a fund, then that money goes to an opportunity zone in an urban community, they can avoid the tax liability for that, and in the process, it helps that community maybe fund some improvements. So that's the gist of the program. We're still waiting to see those dollars come. I don't know if you have any more.
No, we've been waiting for the Department of the Treasury to issue their final rules, so no one really knows yet quite how it's going to work. So stay tuned.
Okay, as we wrap up, the final thing really is a number, 2 or 3 pages, if you look toward the end of your program, of funding for city and county services, and that's everything from, again, public safety to homeland security to CDBG funding, health funding, transportation funding, housing and urban development. And what we've really done here is kind of put a long list of a number of those programs that we're always looking to to see if we can get some federal funding from those, and to make sure that in the appropriations bills that are coming, that those funds don't get cut. We have seen over and over with a number of those programs, there are always proposals or attempts to cut community development block grants, for example. Luckily, that's not happened, although we're getting far less than we used to, but we've managed to be able to keep those programs because they're very popular. So that's kind of the list. And at this point, and it's been a long session, any questions or other discussion?
Commissioner Keen?
This question for Doug. On the Turner Diagonal, that's federal money, so that'll be Davis-Bacon? Okay, did anybody else say anything else about the rest of the project?
Sorry, what was the question?
Or any, after we get done building that, the rest of the surrounding area, is that gonna be Davis-Bacon, or they've said anything?
It will not be Davis-Bacon. Of course, we can't require.
Right.
We can't require it to be on. What the developer has committed to us on that project, and you could ask him the question tonight, and he can commit to it, is that on the all the groundwork or dirt work around there, they said that they would do prevailing wage or union labor in that for all the dirt work. Did not commit to it for all the buildings, but he said he would do it for the dirt work. The intersections obviously will be Davis-Bacon because that will be contracted by KTA or KDOT with this federal funding package.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Markley? Commissioner Markley?
I'm sort of joking, but not really. We should lobby for CDBG dollars to be actually spendable because it doesn't do us much good to get the funding when it's such a pain in the butt to spend. It's just...
There's a thought. Commissioner Bynum?
The opportunity zones, so we're waiting on the Treasury Department for the final set of guidelines, but isn't the clock ticking now?
Yes, it is, because it was triggered when the budget began, I think a year ago, January. So everybody's expecting that they'll extend that timeline because otherwise it will end by the end of this year in December. But since nobody even knows yet what those are, I think, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see, but everyone expects them to extend the timeline.
Another issue that's happening with that is in communities anticipating this, and some of the reading I've done nationally, a number of cities are getting in the hunt to compete for these investment dollars. And some cities have actually adopted local incentives that would go along with any money that's invested in one of the federal opportunity zones. So it's going to be very competitive, and I think the key is, and hopefully this is where our partners in DC, Thorne can help us keep tabs on, how do we attract those dollars? How do we get the attention of those investors to come to KCK and not some other city somewhere else?
Question?
Yes, Commissioner Walters?
I might make a comment. The intersection at Village West Parkway and State Avenue, we haven't really talked about that recently. In fact, the last meeting I recall having about that was with Mayor Holland, and I haven't had an opportunity to talk to you about it. I do not support that project, but I understand that it sort of has a life of its own. I believe when I talked to when I had the meeting with Mayor Holland, his reaction was, well, it's not as terrible as I thought it would be. I don't think that that's a project that's going to significantly improve economic development in Wyandotte County. I understand that 20 nights, I don't know how many soccer games there are, 20 nights a year we have some congestion, but Sporting seems to be dealing with that. I don't know we're going to get a big attendance increase if we do that intersection. So I just raised that as an issue. I've never been a supporter of that grade change intersection proposal. And I'm, like I said, I haven't really even talked about it for the last 3 years, but be glad to talk to you about it at some point in the future. Thank you.
It is one where we could probably come back. You're right, it's been a number of years ago when we went through and spent quite a bit of time working through that, and it's the class of the intersection. I know in our conversations with KDOT, they came back and gave us different fears on as traffic continues to move through there, the weave function is inadequate for that. It continues to function, you're right. So the 40-some days at Sporting or the days where we have the races, you know, I mean, we manage through that, but I would, we could come back and as we look at our public works projects and kind of dust off some of that material that was done around that intersection and also was played over to what was going on at state. There were a lot of different proposals that were worked.
Commissioner Philbrook?
So as I understand it, it's not really high on the priority list right now with KDOT. I mean, I know it's there, but I don't think it's high up on their list from what my information recently was. Yes, you know, but they have plenty other things in the works that they want to work on more than that intersection. So, I'm not saying that, you know, they would move it forward at some time, but from what I understand, it's not high on the list.
There is, there's a lot more detail on page 1 and 2 of the program about the 3 projects. I kind of put them under one umbrella, but it's I-435-70, 435 State/Village West Parkway, and then I-435 in parallel. If you look at it, they're all sort of right there together, and it would make sense in the engineering to do, although they're considered separate projects, but there's a lot more detail there if you want that on what's been studied on those projects.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm just going to, before we adjourn to our commission meeting at 7, just a note for our schedule for budget, Thursday, June 27th at 5 p.m., Administrator's budget presentation in the commission chambers. On Monday, July 8th, immediately following Neighborhood Community Development and Economic Development and Finance meeting, our budget workshop to set the maximum mill levy. Thursday, July 11th at 5 p.m., budget workshop. Monday, July 15th, 5 p.m., budget workshop. Thursday, July 18th, 5 o'clock p.m., budget workshop. And the final, that's the final hearing, Thursday, July 25th, final budget public hearing, commission chambers, when we would vote on the budget, just as a reminder. So strap it on. Thank you so much. Thank you.
What was the last one?
July 25th, 5 o'clock. Thank you all. We are adjourned.